Welcome, everyone. Thanks for coming tonight and joining us today for the SEC San Francisco Regional Office, a Historical Perspective program. I'm Ryan Long, Vice President of Development and Engagement for the Securities and Exchange Commission Historical Society. I actually have a deep fondness for the agency, and I'm going to go off script for a second and explain a little bit. But my SEC career started 34 years ago, a few miles from here in a place called Candlestick Park. I had married a woman a year behind me in law school, dragged her out to California, not listening to what the Beach Boys said. And so there was an earthquake during a World Series game. I was doing what they call, I don't know if they still call it this, client development. We're on a golf course. Everything's moving along. She, however, was in a law library with books flying every which way. She leaves back to our hometown of Washington, D.C. 2 weeks after the earthquake, and that's only because she wanted to give 2 weeks' notice. I soon follow. I had a colleague at the office mention that his law school classmate worked for the SEC in Washington, D.C., Ellen Ross. And I managed to have lunch with Ellen. She suggested I put in an application in July of 1990. I joined the Securities and Exchange Commission as an enforcement attorney. Absolutely the best job in government, period, bar none. A few years after that, I got to work for Chairman Arthur Levitt as one of his legal counsel. Absolutely the best job in government, bar none. Followed that with a stint as a Philadelphia office district administrator, and for sure the best job in government, bar none. But with that, I left the SEC, joined First Union. The name changed to Wachovia the next day. A smarter person wouldn't have shown up the third day, but I'm not that smart. And I became Wells Fargo, and I just retired from Wells Fargo in 2022, having spent a lot of time focusing on combating elder financial abuse. So that's the segue. Let me get back to the script, because this is important. So we have the SEC Historical Society runs what essentially is a virtual museum on financial regulation. It's a tremendous resource that offers a collection of histories, photos, galleries, programs, and documents that tell the story of how the SEC regulates the capital markets. The Society educates the public about the importance of the SEC's mission to, number one, protect investors, 2, maintain fair and orderly markets, and 3, facilitate capital formation. The Society's work aids securities market regulators in reaching sound decisions, and it also assists researchers, students, authors, and reporters in better understanding the underlying dynamics of past SEC actions. Many of the visitors to our virtual museum have actually written us to tell us how helpful the museum's virtual archives have been for them. As a nonprofit charitable organization, the historical material that you would be able to get there is free to the public, allowing them to see the great work of the commission and how it gets done. Literally, and a number of folks in this room will attest to it, no matter the party in charge or the political environment. Having said that, it's important to note, though, that as an independent, nonpartisan organization, the Historical Society does not receive any SEC or government funding. Our revenue comes solely from the generosity of donors like you. I'm not going to put the hardcore price on it, but here we go. So we thank Morgan Lewis today for their generous support of the discussion and the reception. Also, if you won't mind standing, I want to have our new executive director, that's you, Kathleen Graham, who joined us in the summer. She had a career working for the largest association of business journalists, and she has now joined us to help the society move forward. I also want to recognize Peter Chan, some of you know Peter, who literally just got off a plane from the East Coast. And Peter's one of the trustees as well. We're grateful to all of today's panelists, some of whom I overlapped with during my time at the Commission, for sharing their time and talent with us today. We sincerely thank my fellow trustee, Jeff Bujikis. He's a partner at Morgan Lewis and former regional director of the same Philadelphia office I work for. So you saw some of the work out there. That's all Jeff's doing, some of those slides and the posters outside. So now, why don't I turn it over to you, Jeff? I'll leave this here for you, and you can grab it.
Super. Thanks so much, Ron. So I'm going to be the one standing between Ron and the talent. So we get the talent here, we got Ron here. But before we go, we're the Historical Society, so we're going to talk a little bit about the history of the San Francisco office. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, particularly those of you who are on the SEC staff, and those of you who are former staffers. You get it. You lived a lot of this, and we really enjoy bringing all of us together to celebrate the San Francisco office. These types of programs are the bread and butter of this Historical Society, and it's when the Historical Society, in my opinion, and I guess I'm biased because I get to chair the museum committee, it's us at our best. So if you haven't been to the website, go to the website. If you haven't donated, think about donating. It's a tremendous effort by a number of different people over a number of different years. And there are oral histories, there are pictorial histories, there are galleries that really celebrate the commission. It's an important part in our capital markets and protecting the investing public. So without further ado, there's certainly a lot of history in this room tonight. We have, and I'm very honored to say, the last 6 regional directors of the San Francisco Regional Office. And I say regional directors, but you'll soon learn that it was not always the case that San Francisco was a region. Before we talk to the luminaries here with us tonight, because we are a historical society, I want to talk for a moment about the history of the office before the tenures of the esteemed panel we have tonight. San Francisco has had an office here of the SEC since the founding of the SEC in 1934. You'll see from the boards outside and the newspaper articles that much like the world has rushed to this area in the last 20 years, chasing internet riches, it was much the same in 1934. Then it was mining, foreign issuers, speculating on the San Francisco Stock Exchange. There was a healthy skepticism of Washington and the new agency that was the SEC in 1934. West Coast businesses wanted an office with autonomy. At the time, San Francisco was the center of the West Coast capital markets, and the idea of appealing to Washington for registration, 10K, was a very new thing. The idea of having to go to Washington to get approval for registration was roundly rejected by those who were running businesses in this area. But with what they called a Western progressivism, the industry and the office coexisted. It was San Francisco, not LA, sorry, Michelle, that was the headquarters of the region. And Los Angeles was a mere district office supervised from San Francisco. Over the years, the office had several enforcement successes and a few long-tenured directors. However, by the late 60s, the office had been stripped of resources, and if you read the news reports, was languishing. In stepped Gerald E. Boltz, and I'm not going to make him the villain of this, but fresh off a tour of duty running the Fort Worth office of the SEC, in December of '71, Boltz was interviewed by the local newspaper as the new regional administrator of San Francisco. And he told the local papers that the San Francisco office had suffered from a manpower shortage, was unable to hire or even travel within its own region. He said his first big decision was whether to move the headquarters of the region to Los Angeles, which he called, quote, the center for the jet age promoter who flies back and forth in a well-organized distribution of securities. He said that LA was where the action was. And with that forewarning, in March of the next year, Boltz let it be known that the regional office was moving to LA. And San Francisco became a branch office. LA was deemed to be the location for most of the brokers, investment advisors, and investment companies that the SEC is charged with regulating. That's what Boltz said. And in Boltz's words, quote, quite frankly, a majority of our enforcement problems are in LA too. It was LA that would grow from 25 to 40 staff members, not San Francisco. And that size would remain about the same for decades. And that leads us to our panel for tonight. In preparation for the program, each of them steadfastly refused to talk about themselves. So I'm going to talk a little, and Mark would take up the entire night. So if you just read the press clippings. So I've taken the liberty of putting together a little bit of Inside the Actors Studio presentation for each of them. I just like to maybe put it on the record for those of us who think that way. First, it's my pleasure to introduce David Bayless. David became the district administrator of the office in 1994 and held that position until mid-1999. In 1993, there were approximately 24 staffers in the office, and the newspapers would later call the office a quote-unquote paper tiger. During David's tenure in the office, it doubled in size. The office pursued significant enforcement cases in many areas, including municipal securities fraud, internet fraud, insider trading fraud, financial reporting fraud, and many other areas. One local newspaper remarked that he had a warm persona, I don't know where they got that from, and boyish enthusiasm. But make no mistake, he and his crew say they will take no prisoners when it comes to enforcement. At the time of his departure, Chairman Arthur Levitt said, "I'm extremely sorry." They didn't say that about me, Mark. "I'm extremely sorry that David is leaving the SEC. He leaves behind a mark of integrity, professionalism, and a commitment to protecting investors. Under his leadership, the district office has established a strong and effective presence in Northern California and in the Pacific Northwest. He will be missed as a lawyer, a manager, and a friend. We wish him well." Next, I'd like to introduce Elaine Morrison, seated closest to me. Elaine took over the regional director job at the departure of Mark. And as you'll see from the boards out front, David. As you'll see from the boards out front, Elaine hit the ground running. In fact, she made it clear that she was going to continue the aggressive enforcement that marked the tenure of David in the office. Elaine came to the SEC from outside the SEC a few years before she became the regional director, and she was head of enforcement. And in that role, she brought some of the most significant and important cases that the SEC brought nationwide. Those cases included stock option backdating cases, financial fraud cases against former top executives at companies like HBO & Co., later merged in McKesson, cases against the general counsel of Google, cases against auditors, including former Ernst & Young partner for altering and destroying audit work papers, cases involving mutual funds and investment advisors, including Franklin Advisors, alleging market timing, late trading, and revenue sharing violations. Truly a game changer in enforcement, not only for San Francisco, but for the SEC as well. When Elaine decided to leave the commission in 2007, Chairman Cox had the following to say: "Under Elaine's leadership, the San Francisco office has enhanced its strong and effective presence in Northern California and the Pacific Northwest. Elaine has led major enforcement actions of enormous significance to investors in our markets. During her tenure, the office doubled in size and became a regional office," said Chairman Chris Cox. "We'll miss her dedication, integrity, and passion for protecting investors. She has loaned her considerable stature and professional skill to the service of her nation for over a decade, and in the process enhanced both the SEC and the strength of our markets." Elaine was followed by Mark Fagel, as regional director. In 2007, Mark had already worked in the office for more than a decade and had served as the associate over enforcement since 2005. Many of the cases that we've already been discussing were investigated and supervised by Mark. Named as regional director in 2007, Mark stepped into the tradition of, in his words, tackling cutting-edge issues out of Silicon Valley and the Pacific Northwest. Mark also had a dramatic effect on the commission as a whole, well outside of San Francisco, spearheading significant and somewhat difficult changes and improvements to the commission including the restructuring of the Division of Enforcement, revising the structure and process of the National Exam Program, and working on the SEC's Labor Management Forum to improve agency operations and employee engagement. When Mark departed in 2013, the SEC looked internally to the office again and promoted Gina Choi, who had joined the office in 2000. Over her 13 years on the staff, Gina was involved in many of the cases that we've mentioned and that we've recounted, cutting-edge cases at the front of not only the papers, but the commission itself that we in Philadelphia looked on with a great amount of jealousy. The office had grown to 130 staff by 2018, and during Gina's tenure, the directors of enforcement noted Gina's work on a series of groundbreaking enforcement actions, including against public and private technology companies in Silicon Valley and their senior officers. Through these cases and other actions, Gina has left an enduring stamp on securities enforcement in the San Francisco region. Pete Driscoll said, her strategic thinking on examination initiatives, particularly those involving developing technology, has advanced OC's mission and protected investors. But Gina's influence was much more than just that. Well beyond these accomplishments, well beyond the cases, she was a mentor to senior officers like me throughout the commission and worked with the staff of the San Francisco office to begin a groundbreaking series of public outreach efforts that really changed the way that the commission, and this is the staff in San Francisco as well as the supervisors, changed the way the commission interacted with investors in an incredibly positive way. And Gina was followed by Aaron Schneider, and you're going to sense a theme here, because each of these people worked in the office for a number of years before they became the regional director. And that's just a testament not only to Helene and David and Mark and the standards that they set, but also their ability to recruit high-quality, excellent attorneys to carry on the mission and the goals that they set in the 90s. Aaron was promoted regional director in 2019, having joined the staff in 2005. Aaron was an assistant director in the asset management unit and served as the associate over enforcement in the office from 2015 to 2019. She was instrumental in a number of high-profile and important cases for the commission, like cases involving Theranos, Tesla, and registrants in the financial services industry, while continuing the office's tradition of outstanding outreach and commitment to the investing community. Aaron also guided the exam and enforcement staff through one of the most challenging periods in the history of the commission, the COVID crisis. Prabir Grewal, who is the acting director of enforcement, had this to say when Aaron decided to depart the commission. Aaron's been an outstanding leader for the San Francisco office. Her tenure has been marked by a number of groundbreaking enforcement cases, especially in Silicon Valley, that will benefit investors for many years to come. The San Francisco office is well positioned to identify and confront the rapidly changing market dynamics that animate the region. So, Monique, this is what you inherited. So in August of 2022, Monique Winkler stepped into the role of regional director in the office. Like those who had come before her, Mark, Gina, and Aaron, she was a longtime staffer in the office itself. Beginning her time in the commission in 2008, she served in the Division of Enforcement's Public Finance Unit as an assistant director, and then as an associate over enforcement starting in 2019. Monique is carrying forward the rich tradition of all these regional directors that you see up here, and in many ways, the San Francisco office has come full circle from where it started in 1934. In 1934, it was viewed as a place where cutting-edge issues, cutting-edge securities were going to be regulated. And in the intervening years, it almost died out, but through the efforts of the people sitting at this table, it has once again become a leader of regional offices. And with that, we're going to turn to them so they can tell you their stories. That's you.
That's me. The first shall be last, and the last shall be first. All right. In terms of the background when I walked in, consider this, that the office had not had an office head for 3 years. And before that, the only office head they had come out from Washington for a year, I think to sort of get the pay. Quit after a year, went back to Washington. So for after 4 or 5 years, the staff felt rightly like, what the hell are we doing here? So when I was hired, one of the real mandate from Levitt, Jim Clarkson, and Bill McLucas was the office is too small, you got to grow it. The office has too low a profile, you got to raise it. And oh, by the way, you got to bring some great enforcement actions. So what we did, I mean, I am proud that we did double the size of the office in my tenure there. And the people, it was not just numbers, but it was the people we hired. Elaine, Mark, I mean, these are terrific lawyers. And we made a real focus at that time on, looking at law firms. I wanted associates who were sick of the law firm racket, maybe in their 3rd or 4th year. And so I'd say, look, in talking to them, I'd say, you can carry the briefcase with the partner, or you can come here and take testimony from the client. So we were able to really get great people. I mean, Jeff's gone through some of them. It's amazing. So we grew the office. But the second thing, and this is perhaps unusual, Levitt told me specifically, I'll never forget this, he said, you got to get out there and raise the profile of the office. I said, well, what does that mean? And he said, you know what I mean. I said, okay. So you will notice this if you look back, that I would talk to anybody at the drop of a hat. I'd talk to any reporter. I'd speak at any convention. I'd speak at any group. I'd speak at any law firm, any of that stuff. We got known. And what I found was there was a lot of demand. Like, what is the SEC up to? Well, let's ask this SEC guy down the street to tell us. So we did. We did build a reputation of the office. We talked to the legal community here and in Portland and Oregon. We talked to business and industry groups. And even within the SEC, like we always went back to D.C. for, any case that went up, because I said we're going back because we're going to sell ourselves to the SEC. So we stand at the commission and, get the case approved. But we'd wander the halls and talk to people. Because one thing I noticed, I don't know if this has changed, but the heads of the divisions never came here. So I would bug them. Come on out. San Francisco's a nice city, And so we got some people that come out. But the most important thing, because this is what it always comes down to, is bringing significant enforcement action. And the two I would just like to point out were Media Vision and California Micro Devices. These were huge financial fraud cases involving over-recognition of revenue by the company. It was a massive fraud. And what was great about these cases is, obviously, they're Silicon Valley companies, major Silicon Valley companies with thousands of customers, decent product, but the crooks were running it. And so what we were able to do is sue CEOs, chief accounting officers, controllers, head of sales of these companies. These were not just some guy off the street. These were major actions. And also, in fact, we got the U.S. Attorney's Office involved And Mike Yamaguchi, who was then the Attorney General, was very U.S. Attorney here in San Francisco. He was very good, and helped us bring we helped him bring criminal cases on both Media Vision and California Micro Devices. There's differences between the two, but I'm not going to bother with it. Then what's important is the similarity. High-flying Silicon Valley companies, insider trading, top executives. We got publicity in New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, all the papers out here. So it built up the reputation. And I remember very vividly McLucas being very happy. And the chairman saw me once back when I was in D.C. It was hard to get much out of Arthur Levitt, but he said, good job. All right. So that's sort of the sum and substance.
So Helene, you come in shortly after David starts as regional director, and the office is a district office. It's not a regional office. And so what were the challenges of that? And why don't you talk a little bit about what your goals were when you came to the commission?
Okay. During my tenure, as you're indicating, Jeff, we were promoted from a district office to a regional office. And my goals, so as you heard from the background, I overlapped with David when he was regional director. I was the enforcement head. And then when I was regional director, Mark was the enforcement head for a lot of the time. So this was, the things that David talked about were priorities that cut across the office head's management for many years. And we did, just to put them all together, we brought a large number of nationally important enforcement cases against big name public companies in Silicon Valley. We coordinated with the criminal authorities and brought cases simultaneously where they charged them with crimes. We charged them civilly. We increased the public profile of the office. I also spent, and I'm sure Mark did also, spent a lot of time speaking to groups and to make ourselves known. We built good relationships in Washington with the top people there and in the other regions. By the way, it strikes me that if we were working remotely, we would not have succeeded in doing that. Okay. Anyway, so make sure they knew of our impressive work. And the office grew and we hired excellent people both on the enforcement side and the exam side. So when all of this was going on, we looked down, or I looked down south to LA, our regional headquarters, and we were the district, saying, we compare, we're just almost as big as them. We are bringing good cases. We're doing good exams. Why are they a region and us not? So I started advocating with the help of a lot of other people, to become a region. And, other district office heads were doing the same thing. The difference between being a region and a district is the two main things are twofold. First of all, we would report as a region directly to DC rather than having to report to LA. And then unclear sort of how it went to DC after that. Mostly us through LA. And the second thing was on the slots when we were wanting to increase the size of the office. When we were a district, the slots were awarded to the region. And then the regional director decided how many we got compared to the LA office. So as a region, we would just seek the slots ourselves. Anyway, in April 2007, all the districts were made regions, and we became a regional office. I also wanted to mention that I think the issue of the autonomy of the regional director sort of runs through this discussion. And at that time, although we definitely reported to Washington and we needed approval of the commission and all the divisions leading up to the commission before we could sue somebody or settle a case. I felt I had a fair amount of autonomy in terms of what cases to open, running the office, and things like that. I mean, in opening cases, there was sometimes a fight over who would get it. But as we positioned ourselves with more and more strength, people assumed we would take the big cases in our region.
So Mark, we're going to shift gears for a second here and talk a little bit about some of the challenges that you faced when you were regional director, and I alluded to it in the opening discussion about modifications to the Division of Enforcement and other initiatives that went into effect right around that time after some exam issue in New York.
Yeah, I mean, I came in, it was the glory days, and just to give Helene and David a little more kudos. When I was at Morrison & Foerster for 6 years, and partway through that, I thought the SEC sounded interesting, and I remember Jordan and other people at MoFo like, why would you do that to your career? That's suicide. And then just a few years later, my friend Mike Dickey and a few other MoFo people had come here and like, you've got to come. This place is great. I mean, it was a huge turnaround. And by the time I went, Jordan and other people I was working for were not saying that's a stupid thing to do. I mean, it really had changed its reputation. It was actually a smart career move to go to the SEC. And that was David and Helene really changed the profile. So I thought, okay, this is great. When I'm regional director, I just free ride off their work. And then, not very long after getting the appointment, there was that Madoff thing. And a financial crisis just for fun on top of that. So all of a sudden, they were literally in Congress talking about shutting down the SEC and building something new. So my job very quickly transitioned from just running this amazing, well-oiled machine they had put together to becoming part of this national initiative to basically reset enforcement and exam. So I worked a lot with Rob Kazami, who was the enforcement director at the time, and Mary Shapiro, the chair at the time, and all the regional directors. And we set up specialized units. We changed the formal order process to make things go quickly. We restructured the office, which meant some demotions and promotions, which was tough, but really rebuilt the way enforcement worked in response to Madoff and the financial crisis. At the same time, we had the same thing going on the exam side. And some of that was actually pretty good. So Dodd-Frank came in, and all of a sudden, the investment advisory program changed dramatically. We had hedge funds and private equity funds in San Francisco. We had a great staff who, on the exam side, who literally would examine, advisors and brokers who are working out of their basement sometimes. And all of a sudden, we've got these massive funds. We're hiring experts to help put it together and really change the nature of the exam work. So that was fun. It was exciting to see these changes, but it also changed the regional director position. I felt like I was working with national leadership to change, nationwide what's going on. I wasn't as close as I'd like to be with the day-to-day operations of the office, and that was tough. It was nice to see people thriving in this new environment, but they were reporting to people in different places with unit heads, so it really changed the nature of the regional director job.
Gina, you're at the commission. You're a staff attorney at this time, so you're seeing Mark's struggles, I guess, but you're also living through the changes. And so, how did that inform you as you advanced and took the position of regional director after that period of change?
I have to say that I don't know that we felt that. We felt that turmoil. Like, I think Mark's leadership, Helene, and I think kind of just hearing what David, like the tone that David set, I think we felt very safe as staff, and we all felt like we were taking, like, I didn't feel like, oh, we're a district office, we're not a regional office. Like, that never occurred to me. I always felt like if we were that leadership valued excellence, they valued integrity, and if we did our job, things would go the way they were supposed to go. We would be able to bring enforcement action. We would be able to, the exam staff would be able to perform their examinations, and we would work together as an office, and things would get done. Another thing I think Mark didn't mention that he was doing at the time was a move. I don't know if any of you have been to our offices at 44 Montgomery, but those of you who have, they are spectacular. And Mark was dealing with moving the office, I think in the wake of a bit of a scandal, a real estate scandal at the SEC.
DC overspent, and they told us, well, you can go to the Tenderloin. It's awesome, and your staff will love it. It's a better commute, and they were all set.
More space.
Yeah. We kept that.
So then, Gina, you become director, and then you become cynical, because when you're regional director, you have to be cynical. So now we've gotten the sunshine. Now let's talk about the reality. So you're dealing with you're in a regional office. You have a number of different specialized units from enforcement in the regional office, and other challenges. What was that like to you?
I don't know that I thought of them as challenges. I will say, for those of you, I always say, Mark, I don't know if I've ever said this publicly. If you've ever seen our offices, I always say, God bless Mark Fagel, because the offices are really wonderful. And a great place to have to spend your time. But I think, the idea of challenges, I don't know that I felt that as much. I actually felt, like there was a little bit more connection with other offices. I think that was nice. It actually, I think that idea of a national program, but being in a regional office was really kind of the best of both worlds. I think all of the frontline supervisors at the time, when Mark was the regional director, and Mike Dickey was the head of enforcement, we were all unit ADs. So I think I can understand how that could be challenging for leadership within the regional office. But they did a really great job of just making sure that things worked and things got done. And I think that's probably evolved through the years. But I think we brought some really great cases, whether they were unit cases or whether they were core cases from within the office.
So, Aaron, you step in in 2019? Everything's set up. You got a humming machine. It's just going to run forever. No worries. You have this decades now of tradition of excellent cases, and so then what happens?
So Gina left in late 2018. Kristen Snyder, who was heading the exam program, and I were acting regional directors together. And so even before COVID hit, Kristen and I had a 35-day government shutdown that started over the holidays. I think everybody at this table is very practiced in saying, trying to calm everyone down, saying we've always seen this talk. We've always heard talk about a CR. We've never seen a significant government shutdown. It's going to be fine. And then all of a sudden we had a 35-day government shutdown. That was very scary and shocking for a lot of people. And it takes a huge hit on your morale to have, your job essentially shut down for 35 days, and people were really worried about whether they were going to get paid or not. Then we all got back to work, and paid. Yes, everyone was paid. I was appointed the director, sometime in the middle of 2019, and things were going along very well. And then COVID hit. And this is the Historical Society. And just for perspective, I felt like PG rated. But it really felt like SFRO was at the forefront of this COVID issue. At the time, a lot of the cases and the outbreaks were in Seattle, in the Pacific Northwest. That's where the cases were exploding. Right about that time, we were planning our annual Northwest Regulators Conference. And just, for those of you that know it and that have been that, this is a conference that brings together, more than 100 regulators and enforcement lawyers, regulatory lawyers from all sorts of agencies from throughout the Pacific Northwest. And here we were proposing to hold this conference, flying in all these people into the epicenter of COVID. We also had a ton of examiners up there doing exams because they were, part of this whole initiative with the Northwest Regulators Conference. And I think probably every day for 3 weeks, Kristen Snyder, Elena Rowe, and I talked, should we cancel it? Should we cancel it? Should we cancel it? We finally did cancel it. And then 2 weeks later, Gavin Newsom issued a stay-at-home order for San Francisco. So, I think it very quickly became not about, of course it was about the work, but it became very clear to us early on that we were not going to get anything done unless people felt safe. People felt like the office had their back, their supervisors had their back, and that there was some sort of cohesiveness within the office. I certainly was not prepared. That's not what I'm trained in. Those are not the skills that I had. But we certainly, I think Monique and I and Kristen and Elena really tried to do the best that we could to try and keep this office functioning, because it was so important to keep everybody's morale up so that they, were motivated to come to work, because as you guys all know, that was an insane time, especially for people who were taking care of aging parents or young children or had other health issues. It was a lot. So on the work side, the exam program, those guys had to hit the ground running. The exam program, we all know, they're the boots on the ground. They had to be out there immediately, not out there physically, but reaching out to our registrants, making sure they were doing okay, were their systems functioning, did they have the right controls in place? There was really no time for that exam program to even deal with their own personal lives. They were out there really having to hit the ground running. And I think Kristen Snyder did an excellent job of leading the program through that time frame. On the enforcement side, I think you really had to rethink how we did investigations, right? Before you could sit in a room for 8 hours and take testimony of a witness. You can't do that over Zoom or WebEx. And so I think it really changed our mindset in terms of what do we really need to prove? What are our critical elements? How can we get them quickly? How can we move these enforcement cases along? And I think we were really well prepared to do that. From Gina's work and Mark's work as well. I think they were very good at forcing the enforcement staff to be really critical about thinking about their evidence and how they're going to prove in court. So we were well positioned to do that. But so I think it actually helped us think a little bit more strategically about how to bring these enforcement actions. And ultimately, at the end of the day, so I left before the staff returned, which is very sad. It's really nice to see everybody out there in the audience. But I think ultimately it was a success story in terms of people really overcoming a lot of obstacles. I think exams did a great job, enforcement did a great job, and I think seeing the benefits of it today. I'm sure Monique would agree.
So Monique, would Monique agree? That's when we were doing prep on this, and we might have accidentally cut you off from hearing it, but we were all commiserating that I just can't imagine what it's like supervising in this work from home environment, and commend you and your staff of supervisors for adapting in that regard. Maybe you could talk a little about what we're going to see going forward and kind of what your experience was.
Well, Jeff, before I can answer that fascinating question, I, unlike everyone else here, has to give my SEC disclaimer. My comments today are provided in my official capacity as the Commission's Director of the San Francisco Regional Office, but do not necessarily reflect the views of the Commission, the Commissioners, or other members of the staff. And so with that, I think probably it's fairly well known that the SEC, under the collective bargaining agreement, is actually returned to the office, but there are a limited amount of time where the staff actually needs to work from the office. And I think we've sort of settled into a routine where some folks come in more than they have to, some folks come in what they have to. And I think I've had to figure out, and I, along with Elena Rowe and Jason Lee and Carlos Vasquez, have had to figure out how to actually have a productive, unified workforce going forward. And I think happily, I think it's actually worked out well. I'm a firm believer in the idea that happy employees are productive employees. So I think we've worked together to sort of do, the leadership and the staff have worked together to do everything we can to actually make people want to do the work, number one, above all, wherever they're doing the work, want that to happen and do it well. And every day, sort of, the numbers out of the exams program, out of the enforcement program, the last couple of years have been just astounding. I'm so proud to lead the office, the people that have actually, sort of like a theme. I feel like I'm on the shoulders of everyone else. I've heard things like great people. It's a smart career move to come to the SEC. Those things just ring true. And we've had new staff members come, folks leave in the last probably year or so. I think there's a big sort of shift in the legal market, but I'm so lucky to have the people in our office that we do. And we actually have a number of new faces in this audience. I'm not going to call anybody out, despite fingers being pointed, but it continues to be a great place to work, filled with great staff.
Super. So we're gonna shift gears a little bit. It's like picking a favorite movie or a favorite child. I know it's difficult for all of you, but that's why we did prep. So you were forewarned. All joking aside, so we've talked a little bit about some of the fantastic work that the office did, and I was wondering if maybe each of you, and I'll call you out, could talk about either a case, an examination, an initiative, something that you look back on with a lot of pride, and also recognize that it was important, either for the office or for the commission as a whole. So, Mark, I'll start with you. What do you look back on?
Obviously, a big part of my existence and many of the people in the room's existence was options backdating. And it was an opportunity for our office to be not just doing big cases, national cases, but really be at the center of an initiative. And this was an all hands on deck. Everybody in enforcement was doing these cases. It was probably the first time in our history we were actually welcoming D.C. to take a few cases from Silicon Valley. But it was a national initiative. You had dozens of cases, if not more, nationally, and we had to coordinate. The commission had to be consistent. So we had a task force. We were having regular meetings. So it was nice to be in the center, to have people looking to San Francisco for expertise, and it was great to be first. We brought Brocade, which was the first case, and it was really a bottom-up case, because I have to say a lot of us, myself included, were like, there's no money involved. Who cares about stock options? It seems crazy. And it was really having people like Bob Leach, who's at the U.S. Attorney's Office now, Patrick Murphy, Mike Dickey, of course, Brian Huckrow, who was an accountant at the time, and I understand is now back at the office. And it was Brian who came to my office and said, no, Mark, let me explain to you why this matters. And before you know it, everyone in the commission is doing these cases. So that was really the staff saying, this is something we should do. This is bigger than you think. So that was a huge part of my life. I do want to give one other case just because of who showed up tonight. There was a small case involving a guy named Boots, who took some money he wasn't entitled to through a broker. And I like the case mainly because, and this is really on Helene's shoulders, historically when I came in, the examiners would do a great job. They'd do a referral, but it wouldn't necessarily be something enforcement would be able to work with. It's like, this isn't something we can prove in court. And I think Helene really started the process, and I was excited to continue it, of really coordinating our exam and enforcement program. So here we've got someone like Stephanie in the exam program who says, I've got something here. You've got Kristen in enforcement. They talk. So long before the exam is over, the examiners and the enforcement group are like, how do we as examiners give something that enforcement can work with? And I think that's normal now. I think that's how everybody operates. But that was a really new system, to have these groups coordinate and make sure our exam program was not out there in the dark wondering, will enforcement care about this or not? We coordinated those very successfully.
And you actually, I think we talked about it, made that a structure. Talk about that for a second.
And we have regular meetings, and I remember Helene saying there's this guy, Daryl Hagel, who runs the exam program. So Fagel, Hagel, you do your thing. And we'd have our examiners who are right here.
I have no recollection of saying that.
Fagel, Hagel, that was a thing. So we had regular meetings. So I would know what's in the pipeline, what are the examiners looking at. So I would be able to talk with enforcement and say, well, are these cases we want to do? And vice versa. We knew it was interesting, so I could talk to the Daryl and the exam staff and say, if this is the issue, here's what would be great to get. in terms of evidence, because a lot of our examiners aren't necessarily litigators, and understanding these sort of documents would be really interesting. Getting this sort of information might make the difference between a really good exam deficiency letter that might correct the issues and something that we end up saying we should take to court. And that was just through regular meetings, knowing what's in the pipeline.
So, Helene, I'm going to give you 5 minutes of rebuttal. No, but in all seriousness, I mean, looking at just doing the research on the office and seeing all the cases. I mean, we've talked about it in some of the prep meetings, just some amazing cases. But what stands out for you from your time?
When I first started, we brought cases against companies you've never heard of, and that changed during the tenure of the three of us. The first really big name case we brought was in 2000. It was a financial fraud case against executives of a company that merged with McKesson. And this was also a case where we coordinated with the criminal authorities, and the press release was on behalf of both organizations, and it was a big deal. At the time, financial fraud and reporting cases were the top priority of enforcement as a whole. And we followed the McKesson case with a lot of other cases involving big name companies, executives there, and auditors in that field of type of case. An interesting thing about the McKesson case is the DC office had opened it first because they read something in the paper 3 hours before we did, because of the time difference. And, we decided we were going to fight for this, especially because McKesson headquarters was right across the street from our office. And that's where, witnesses were and documents. And so David and I guess, who did you talk to? Who did we talk to? The head of enforcement, and talked him into giving us the okay. And the thing with this, going from the no-name cases to the big-name cases, it was like a chicken and egg situation. We needed to prove we could do the big cases, but at the same time, we needed to have a big case so we could prove that. So this was our big case. And then I also wanted to talk about one other case. In 2002, we brought one of the first Regulation FD cases, Regulation Fair Disclosure. And for posterity, Regulation Fair Disclosure was adopted in 2000. And the purpose of it was to require disclosure to the entire public at one time, as opposed to selective disclosure to favored analysts and who could trade on it and stuff like that. So we were our case was one of 4 first cases that were all brought simultaneously to show that the commission felt very strongly and was going to enforce Reg FD.
Thanks, Wayne. The list of omissions is way longer than that. So read the board out front if you want to know some of the other cases. So David, you're now you were in private practice at this time, and you see all these cases happening. Was there any wish to go back, or how did you feel about these big name cases that Helene and later Mark are doing out of the office that you maybe put it kindly dragged out of the doldrums?
No. I mean, I had done my time. I had promised Chairman Levitt 3 years, and I actually stayed 5, so that was enough. But I mentioned this in my opening remarks. We did bring these financial fraud cases. The MediaVision case, California Micro Devices, parallel criminal and civil times, and I was just happy to see actually that you were continuing and bringing more and more and bigger and bigger. Okay, because that's great. Because that also meant work for me.
So Gina, when we were prepping for this, you before I'm going to ask you what your favorites are, but before we get to that, you had kind of a reaction to remembering what it meant for the office to do a case like McKesson, maybe, and having that as, and maybe you could talk about that for a second, and then give me your favorites.
Sure. I can definitely talk to that, and I wanted to bring up a couple other things based on what folks have said. But I was a new staff attorney in the office when the office brought McKesson, and it was a really big deal. You could feel it in the office. I didn't work on it at all, but you could see Bob Mueller, I think, was the U.S. attorney at the time. Had a great leadership team in the office then, in the U.S. Attorney's office. And it just felt like there was a lot of attention from D.C. I can't remember if it was Steve Cutler the head of enforcement at the time, or was it Dick Walker?
I think it was
Dick Walker still? Yeah. I mean, I definitely felt that, but I think just a couple things. David, as he was giving his initial remarks, I now realize, how important, that was something that we did, back in the day, was we would go and we would advocate for our cases in Washington, D.C. And I remember doing that with Helene, flying to D.C., going to the different commissioners' offices when you had a challenging, enforcement action. And I don't know. I feel like the agency is more political now, and maybe, you can do all the advocacy that you want and you still are not going to change anybody's mind. So is that really a good use of resources? But at the time, it was really just an amazing experience to be able to go, and talk to the different, commissioners, their counsel, different divisions, and kind of talk about why your case mattered, how you were going to, why this was a smart recommendation that you had brought. And I realize now that probably started with David. And I think one other thing that I would mention is I always felt, and perhaps this is because of Helene's background as a journalist, that she really, really encouraged us to have a press release and to let folks know what you're doing, and to be able to synthesize your complicated case into a small, understandable, little story. And that's something that I think we all really benefited from. And I think
it's amazing you say that, because in doing the research and for the boards, there's a lot of you as a staff attorney quoted in a press release, which never would happen in Philadelphia. That's because of Ron.
No, I actually think that was Helene's kind of generosity, but also really kind of pushing the staff. I think we all experienced that feeling of like, we are going to call some press people right now, and you better have a quote that you need to, and so really, kind of, encouraging folks, and really, encouraging them to step outside their comfort zone a lot of times. And I think it really did make a big difference, for our cases. And I think that's a legacy that's really lived on.
So Gina, as far as favorite case, why don't you give us, I could ask you to talk about a case, but why don't you, do you have one, or do you want to pass it on to your compatriots?
I had an awesome enforcement director at the time, and a great assistant director who brought like really great cases. So let me pass that along.
Well, maybe we won't force Monique to be last every time. So I'm sorry, Aaron, but this time we're going to let Monique cut in line here. So Monique, so what when you hear this and you think about the cases that meant a lot to you as either a staff or a regional director, what comes to mind?
Well, first I do want to say, as a regional director, I'm only 1 year in, so I think the best, I hope, is yet to come. But if I'm going to mention a case, I'm going to mention Theranos, because there are actually 5 people in this room who worked on Theranos,
and some of us on the other side,
and probably it was a bit of a valleyful employment for a while, but it was I think driven all the way from the enforcement head in D.C. who called me regularly at 7 in the morning for updates, and a team that just worked so hard against an army of lawyers on the other side. It was a remarkable case, and then leadership who really pushed the timing of the case, pushed to get the case settled. For me, it was one of the sort of working on the case and then seeing the results, and then actually to this day still seeing the impact that it has in the Valley. I'd have to talk about Theranos.
How did San Francisco have the opportunity to be the one to handle that case?
We opened it. We opened it. But I would also say that case, Monique and Aaron, that was not a slam dunk case. You look at that case now because of the extraordinary work that the staff did. But when we when we read about that case in the Wall Street Journal, like things that were going on, we opened that case and, it wasn't clear. There was no whistleblower who came to us. There were no disgruntled investors who came to us. There weren't, this was a high flying board, a very, charismatic, founder, CEO, very high powered legal counsel. So the idea that, everybody was clamoring for that case. That's not what it was. It was, we opened that case early. And by the time people recognized what it was, then, we had it.
Right. For those of you who don't know, there is a little bit of finders keepers when it comes to cases. So it's not always geographic, and there are some offices that, like San Francisco, that are very aggressive in trying to identify those cases, and you keep what you kill in many cases, unless you have Helene and David saying, give it back because we want it. then they get their way.
There's still the who reads the news at 6 a.m. battle. It still happens.
So Aaron, you talk a little bit about your favorites. There's a lot to pick from.
Well, I think, Theranos was an example of the office focusing on the Valley, which it always has done. You've heard it from everyone on this panel. It was a really important area for us. When Gina and I and Monique were working at the SEC, it was a little bit of a different ballgame because all of a sudden there's a ton of money concentrated in all these private companies down in the Valley. And so it wasn't necessarily easy, I think, for us to convince DC that these cases were worth bringing. But our staff was amazing at articulating why these cases were important, why we should keep after them. And I think we really tried to, we could have just brought, a ton of fraud cases, right? Theranos was a fraud case, obviously. We could have brought a ton of fraud cases, but we were really focused on trying to identify, these are areas of this market that are problematic. And so, we brought the Theranos fraud case. We brought a negligence case against a company called Zenefits to illustrate the harms that negligent behavior can have. We brought registration cases against brokers who were selling pre-IPO companies. At the time that we were doing that, Facebook was a pre-IPO company, which is hard to believe. We brought cases against exchanges that were not registered properly. So we were really trying to illustrate things that were problematic in different ways. And I think one of the things that I think really marked the office's tenure for both Gina and my time was, it really is the staff trying to make a mark. So we tried to make a mark in this private company space. But then also, there are cases against companies like App Annie. It's the first case against an alt data provider. That was a very difficult case to bring. Case against Robinhood, which was, one of the fast rising online broker advertising itself as commission free, but failing to disclose that it was getting payment for order flow. So all of these cases like this, it wasn't me opening it or Gina opening it or Monique opening. These are staff ideas that they're paying attention to what's going on and trying to keep us very relevant. So I think it was very gratifying.
So Gina, before we leave these, I'm going to pick some of my favorites. So the outreach. Can you just talk about the genesis for that? And it was something that I think permeated through the entire commission. on a number of, I know we felt it in Philadelphia and really kind of challenged ourselves to do something similar to what you all had done with teachers. Maybe you can talk about that for a little bit and what the origins were for that. And
Yeah, I think
Monique
that
and Aaron, please feel free to hop in if you want to also.
definitely. I think that you can kind of see the kind of the bones for that, but I think a lot of that is just hiring really motivated people and really talented people who want to make a difference and recognize that in order to make a difference, sometimes you really just have to get out there. And so I think a lot of what Aaron was saying about, Aaron and Monique were saying about Theranos, it was a fertile time at that point because one initiative that was incredibly staff driven, and I was just looking over some of the press on this in preparing for this panel, was our Silicon Valley initiative. And that was where the staff really kind of pushed us to kind of team up with Stanford, the Rock Center at Stanford, to kind of get some space, get us down there speaking, bringing people out from DC to talk about issues of, pre-IPO companies, some of the issues that they faced. The first year we did it, and we had Drew Bowden, the head of exams, as well as Keith Higgins, who I think was in a snowstorm, and Carlos Vasquez, poor guy, and did an amazing job. Like really just really was up there, kind of talking about capital raising through the Jobs Act and getting money in a pre-IPO context. And I think that was that was a very successful event, very well attended. And I think it got enough legs and buzz that we were able to convince the chair to come out and get a speech and like really kind of put down a marker on Silicon Valley. And that was just very much a staff-driven initiative and very much an exam and enforcement and kind of in our backyard at a time. I think you can kind of hear it through the cases is there's no other region like this when it comes to issuers. I mean, that's just what defines this region. And of course, like the asset managers who have now, not now, but like who have discovered, the, innovation and the companies, that are here. So that's just been kind of a focal point of the office, through the years.
So Mark, I'm going to go off the reservation for a second, but I know you're ready for it. So the Internet Surveillance Group, I think it was reported in the press, you were branch chief of that. I thought that cyber started, just a couple of years ago with the cyber unit. Was there actually, did the Internet exist back then?
It's hard to imagine that they actually created something for Internet fraud because it seems weird, but it was so novel at the time. So this was a DC initiative, and they allowed a few of us in a few offices to set up branches. So Helene asked me to be the branch chief for this group, I guess, because I had my own website. She figured I knew enough to be able to do this. But it was great. I mean, it was very cool. I mean, it seems like, how could this be real? But we brought the first case in San Francisco that was an online offering conducted entirely over the internet, and which seems like, well, weren't there a lot of those? But no, this was like early 2000s. It was the first time someone raised all the money on the internet. We brought the first case. That was cool. We brought the biggest online Ponzi scheme ever, and it would probably still be going on if the guys running it hadn't gotten so drunk on their flight to Costa Rica that they fell off the plane literally and their suitcase full of cash opened up. But that was something that Rob Durham and others in the office who were still there. I mean, it was a massive case, all done online, and that was a new phenomenon at the time. We brought one of the first internet incubator, probably the first internet incubator. It was a local pump and dump scheme, but they had a series of pump and dump schemes, all with Bay Area tech companies that didn't really exist. Which now you look back and you read about these cases still every day, but at the time these were brand new, and we had to kind of figure out. And we had some help from DC, but we were kind of on our own. Gina was in the branch with me. We kind of had to make it up.
We could go on and on about this. It's just that the cases are just fantastic and inventive and cutting edge and really just Helene, I know you want to chime in.
Can we give some kudos to the exam side also? I know we've mentioned you guys, but when I just wanted to mention when I was the regional director, we had a large population of investment advisory firms in the region, which I assume we still do. And our investment advisor exam staff, I believe, was very well regarded, which resulted in us getting a huge slug of additional slots on investment advisors and funds, and which really, we talk about the office growing. That was a big reason and important role that the office was doing with its slots. So I just wanted to say kudos for that.
I saw Kristen in the audience, so she's getting lots of shout outs. She's keeping her head down back there, I see. So I asked each panelist to think about a tradition in the office or an unsung heroine that influenced them or that they wanted to just call out for a second and talk about, maybe a special contribution. And so, Gina, maybe I'll start with you. When you think about the office and someone special or some tradition, what comes to mind?
Just the leadership team when I was there was just really special to me, and I think that's probably true of everybody here. But I guess Aaron was part of that, but also Kristen Snyder, who was our exam associate at the time, who then took on a national leadership role, was just amazing and just a real support for me personally, and just was so great at giving her perspective. And I just really valued that team. And also Elena Rowe, who was the ARDO, we called it, the Assistant Regional Director for Operations, but really a COO, somebody who came over from the enforcement side, and took a job that, maybe not necessarily was completely in her wheelhouse and not necessarily what, she signed up for. I think she took a little bit of a leap, to take on that position and really had tremendous impact. And can I get one more? Somebody just reminded me today of Mike Walker, who was just really personified the San Francisco regional office. I can't even remember Mike's title right now. Can you, Aaron or Monique? Oh, administrative officer. He just, I think, Rahul was just saying that every time he talks to anybody in any other office, they all comment on Mike Walker, and he really just exemplifies just the professionalism, and the kindness, within the San Francisco office. He just always went above and beyond, would think about your needs before his, and, commissioners would comment on it, chair would comment on it. He really, just personified the office during my tenure.
Can I give an example on Mike, just so people understand what this means? There was a period of time we did not have a budget that would allow us to buy styrofoam cups so witnesses could get water out of the tap during testimony. We weren't allowed to buy that, but we complained. And one morning we walked in, there was a big box of cups, and I didn't ask Mike how he did it. They were there. Witnesses had tap water. That was Mike.
Never drink out of the pitcher at the SEC office. So, Helene, you're next up.
I was going to mention the RDO, not call that title, during my tenure, whose name is Judy Anderson. She came to the office, from being a big firm litigator. And similarly to what Gina was saying, she took over essentially the COO role. And also, when we were trying to get these big cases, She also led the, I guess it's now called Complaints, Tips, and Referrals group, and litigated. She really did everything, and that was not core enforcement and exam, and enabled me to spend my time focusing on things that I wanted to focus on. And in terms of traditions, I wanted to mention that at Halloween time, I encourage people to dress up. And also we had holiday parties where we had steal the gift things, which I thought was really funny and fun, but was probably, something you shouldn't do these days, but we did it.
We're planning that right now, Helene.
All right, Monique, you grab the mic. You go.
I'm not going to call out anybody by name because I will miss names, but I think I've come to appreciate so much sort of the last 6 months or so since we've returned to the office, the people that have actually been and stayed and still work at the SEC for actually people that date back to, I think, Helene's time and Mark's time. David's time. People that actually, both on the exam side, I see some of their smiling faces in the audience, and on the enforcement side, but they're actually the people I think that sort of hold the office together post-COVID. They actually are there sharing their knowledge, helping the new people come on board, still volunteering to participate in new things. And I think they're sort of the unsung heroes. You're still bringing great cases. I was talking before that I had a meeting with a couple folks who I think collectively have probably 55, 60 years experience at the SEC in a meeting this afternoon, and they just make my life so much easier, and they're just delightful to work with. So those are the sort of the unsung, I call them the unsung heroes, but.
So I won't repeat too much, but I mean, it's the staff. I mean, honestly, we didn't talk tonight about the San Francisco office's teacher initiative, but that was an initiative that really just exemplified the strengths that the San Francisco office has in terms of outreach, working with other regulators, doing exams, finding enforcement cases, just an incredible effort. I would say for tradition, so this is the lore that I have heard, and I'm wondering if David can confirm it, but I have always heard that the reason that we hold our Northwest Regulators Conference in Seattle or Oregon, we alternate years, is because we promised when the Seattle office closed that we would come back every year. Is that true?
That was the price. But no, really, the senators at that time, I forget who they were from Seattle, from the state. They were upset about this. So we had to promise we'll go there, we'll talk to people. Actually, it was a lot of fun. I found it. But yeah, it was a political favor.
So 30 years, though. We hold our Northwest Regulators Conference up there, and everybody that has been there or been part of it knows that community of regulators is just an outstanding group of people who's committed to keeping investors safe. So I think that's a great tradition. Gina already mentioned Elena Rowe. I will do it again for this reason. I think Elena Rowe was the only person during COVID that came into the office every day. She watered people's plants. She walked around. She took pictures of the dead plants and the alive plants. She got confused by some plants that were fake, and then she realized 6 months later she'd been watering them. Elena would go to, DC wasn't sending us, hand sanitizers or wipes or anything like that. She would get up and she would go to Target and she would stand in line and she would buy office supplies for the office. It made a huge difference in making anything that we did during COVID remotely feasible. So.
I just wanted to also follow up on the Pacific Northwest comment. Although we've emphasized here Silicon Valley, we did exams and brought cases throughout the region, and also brought the full gamut of types of cases throughout the years.
So, Mark, what are your thoughts?
A quick tradition. David and Helene are both very well-dressed people. So casual day was very important to me when I think that was the first initiative I took, is making, I don't care what people wear to the office. So that was my big contribution, I think. In terms of people, I don't think people in the room know him, but is a gentleman named Jim Clarkson in D.C., who basically was in charge of regional operations. The strangest thing about our job is we don't have a clear boss. You know, the division directors think they are our boss. So the head of enforcement thinks we report to them. The head of the national exam program thinks we report to them. The chair thinks we report to them. And I never really knew who my boss was, and sometimes I didn't even know who we were. And Jim's job was basically to keep the regions running and kind of give us direction and resources. And it was really important because, again, they thought our job, you know, the enforcement director thought our job is enforcement and that's all we do. And the exam head thought all we do is exams. And in the meantime, we are doing our building leases. We're dealing with HR, we're dealing with the union, we're dealing with IT. All of that, and nobody knows about that. And having someone in D.C. like Jim, who sadly passed away a while back, he was the one who actually we could go to and say, I need styrofoam cups for water, whatever. You know, having someone in D.C. who knew the regions existed and what our real issues were. Because most of the people in D.C., they figured that's the entire universe, and there's maybe some people outside of D.C. somewhere.
I think that topic, the fact that we didn't have that person, came up on every single regional director call throughout my tenure.
No, I second that about Jim. He was a real friend of the regions. And, I mean, he gave us resources, he gave us people. I mean, I didn't know who else to talk to but Jim, but he always came through. He was terrific. You get your new office. I got a new office, you got a new office. I mean, it's really... No, Jim was a real friend of the region.
So the final question that I told the panel that we would ask is, what would you like today's San Francisco staff to know about the history of the office and the program? But I think some of you can cover that, or you can make your final statements to the for the record on the San Francisco office about final. But for today. So why don't we go down the row here? So sorry, Monique, you're going to be at the end again. So we'll start with Elaine.
I'll echo Ron Long's comments. It was the best job ever, working with the best people.
No, this is that's absolutely true. It's a really special office and a really special agency. But I think especially the San Francisco office, it's the office that I think is the very farthest from Washington, D.C. I think a wise man named David Bayless said to me, Gina, there's good news and there's bad news with this regional director job. The good news is you're 3,000 miles away from Washington, D.C., and the bad news is you're 3,000 miles away from Washington, D.C. But it is, it's a really special office that I think has always kind of punched above its weight. And I think that you can see from the panel why that's been the case.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I'm just sitting here and listening to everybody. I'm thinking, is there another region that could come up with 6 people, whose time was together, of this quality? I'll match us against anyone. I mean, and I would like people to understand that.
So as Mike continued to bug me to come to the SEC for MoFo, I finally came in. I interviewed with Helene, and I'm not making it up. She said, Mark, I'm not allowed to ask, but I need a 3-year commitment. And I said, well, 3 is about right. I'll do that. I'll go back to big law. And I stayed for 16 years. And I would not have stayed for 16 years instead of 3 if I didn't love it and love the people and was excited to go home and talk to my family about what we did that day. That was really cool.
It's supposed to be confidential.
Don't repeat that.
I mean, my answer is completely the same. I joined the SEC office. Mark Fagel hired me. I thought I would stay for 3 to 4 years. I stayed 17. And that is absolutely just a credit to the people in that office and the richness that this region has. I mean, I was never bored. There was always something more interesting to do. I think you can feel from this panel, like all of us who are not currently there, we all miss it very much.
I'll be taking job applications after the panel. I agree with everyone else. I mean, it's the people. When I joined the SEC in 2008, after I think probably a year there, I said to myself, this is my retirement job. And I'm still saying that every day. So,
on behalf of the SEC Historical Society, thank you very much for putting it on the record. This has been absolutely wonderful. And it says something that all 6 of you took the time to come out together and do this together. It's very special. So take us home.